action. Just action is social when the actor behaves in such a manner that his action is intended to influence the action of one or more other persons. Yeah, which action we will term as a social actions when you have the actor has some intentions. He knows that these actions will have some influence or some effects on the guys on the person with whom he is interacting. So that actions will be the social action. Or in case if he is doing something, so it will must have some consequences, either positive or negative. Yeah. So elements of social actions, what are the elements? So the actor, the individual that perform actions, the doer of that action, and then the goal, or what is the goal, the objective of action. So a doer is doing something, it must have some objective. Then there must be a social situation, and social situation is an agent of that social action. And then normative orientations, the social patterns, customs, values, norms, whatever. But there must be a normative orientations. And then five, the energy, the ability to perform that social action is called energy. Yeah. So the type of social actions, Max Weber has classified social action into the four categories. So let's have a look at those categories. The first one is the rational orientation to a system of discrete individual ends. So the logic that every event has its cause is the main idea in the such social actions. Yeah, in this type of actions, that actor is behaving rationally, and he know that whatever he is doing, he must have some cause, and he that action must have some effects and cause. The another one is the rational orientation to an absolute value. So such type of actions are done for the highest dignities, like truth, faith, sacrifice. This is the second category of the actions. And third one is the traditional oriented actions. So some actions people perform because of the customs or the rituals and beliefs. These are called the traditional oriented actions. And the fourth one is in such type of actions, emotions are involved, feelings of people are considered. It is neither rational nor traditional. And another thing is that it is unplanned actions. So the actor performs that action according to his feelings or according to the feeling of the society. So what are the examples of the social actions? For example, there is a bus in your street or on the road which is not starting, so people are getting together to push that bus and make it start, or people removing a big hood from the path. In the same way, villagers are building dam around a village to save the village from the flood. These all are example of the social actions. So what is the social interaction? We know that interaction is you are meeting people, you are shaking hands with someone, you are going to someone marriage, you are going to attending a death ceremony of someone, funeral ceremony of someone. These are our social interactions. So it is a social process between two or more than two persons. It is always reciprocal in nature. It has effect in both way. It can be called a stimulus response condition among the individuals. According to Merrill, it is a general process where two or more persons are in meaningful contact, as a result of which their behavior is modified, however slightly. So when you are interacting with people, then it has impacts. We say that whatever companies you are keeping, it must have effect. In the same way, when you are interacting with the individuals around you, it must have some impacts on you and some impacts on the person with whom you are meeting. So what are the elements of social interactions? So what we need to have social interactions? So the first thing is that there must be two or more than two persons. You cannot interact with yourself. Obviously you need someone to interact with. It could be one person or more than one person, and there must be a reciprocal relationship among them. They must be it is give and take concept. You are interacting with someone, you are getting something, and he's you are giving something. There must be the third one is there must be influence on the event, behavior, brain of the persons. like you are meeting someone, there must be some influence on that mention things. So these three conditions interrelate the people among themselves and convert them into a social group. So this was about the social interaction. Then we have types of social interactions. There are two major type of the social interactions according to Young and Meg. One is direct or physical interactions. It involves the physical action among the individuals. It could be beating, fighting, biting, thrashing, pulling, pushing, boxing, kissing, etc. For example, two teams are playing match or soldiers fighting wars is the example of physical interactions. When you are playing match with someone, so you are physically there and you are interacting with people physically. If you are fighting wrestling match, or if you are fighting war, so these are example of physical interactions. It could be you are hugging someone, your loved ones, you are going on date. So these are type of physical interactions. And then we have symbolic interactions. This type of interactions involve the use of language and symbols. It could be a communication through a common language, and since all cultures are expanding or changing through the language, so this is called symbolic interactions. Similarly, shaking, waving hands at each other's. These are also example of symbolic interactions. And we use different instruments to facilitate symbolic interactions like telephones, rails, roads, etc. So anyway, these were two types of social interactions. Now let's proceed to the forms of social interactions. There could be four possibilities of social interactions. For example, between individual and individual, it could be between doctor and patients. If you are a patient or if you are doctor attending patient, so this interaction is between the two individuals. It could be one individual and the group. For example, the teacher is taking class, so teacher is one individual and he is addressing more than one or two students. This is the second type of interaction. And then we have between group and group, so two team playings or two forces fighting, and there could be many more examples as well. So two groups are interacting with each other. Then we have between individual and culture. Yeah, so this type of this form of the interaction is found when the people listen to radio, TV, newspaper, enjoy pictures and absorb exhibitions. So for example, if you are sitting in your home, you are turning on the TV and you are watching the TV show from another country, or if you are watching movie of that some other country or some other culture, then you are in this you are getting involved in this form of social interaction. So these were a different form of social interactions. Now let's move to the measurement of social interaction. How you will measure that, how effective or how strong the social interaction is. So the social interaction is a process of chain and it can be measured mathematically. Its effect can be predicted. So following factors are responsible for it. First is the frequencies. So by frequency we mean how many times you are there, the two individuals, the two individual or group or whatever, they are interacting with each other. So it's the number of interactions. So if the number of interactions are more, it will have greater influence compared to the lesser number of the interactions. Then there is the duration, and so more you are spending time in that interactions, it must have more impact on this person. If you are listening to something now and again, for example, if you are watching TV show all the time, it will have more impact compared to the just having enjoying it for 5 moments. Or we can give another example where that, for example, someone is watching all cricket match or someone is just watching highlights. So the guys who is watching all match must have more impact on him as compared to the guy who is just watching highlights. Then there is another term which is called intensity. It's how much importance those individuals are giving to that importance. When both are agreeing on that agreement or on that discussions which they are doing, So it must have more impacts compared to the just if they are not taking serious. If I mean, if they are not taking serious that interactions, so it will have like less lesser effects. Then the fourth one is the focus. So if there must be a subject matter on the basis of which they are interacting. So for focusing the attention of interacting persons, we must have some subject matter. So by calculating all those above factors, we can calculate the social interaction. So remember, friends, if we have more frequency, duration, intensity, and focus, the social interactions will be stronger compared to the lesser number of meeting or duration or whatever we have studied in that slide. Now let's move to the other topic, the social process. So Arden and Arndt is defining the social process. The term social process refers to the repetitive forms of behavior which are commonly found in social life. There are different social processes which are happening around us in the societies. So we will study these one by one. These are classified into two major classes, groups. One is associative processes, and the other is disassociative processes. So the processes which are help people support each other are associative processes. For example, cooperation, accumulation, assimilation, acculturations, and amalgamation. Another one which are making people apart from each other. They are creating conflicts. They are making people hate each other, making fight each other. These are disassociative processes. So for example, conflicts and competitions. So now let's study these one by one. What is cooperation? Under the pursuit of common interests, the people cooperate with one another and get themselves associated together. So if you have common interests, you choose to cooperate. So same applies to other individuals or groups, or individual and groups, or groups and groups. If they have common interests, they will choose to cooperate with each other and associate each other with themselves. So there are two types of cooperation. One is direct cooperation, according to A.W. Green. Cooperation is the continuous and common endeavor of two or more persons to perform a task or to reach a goal that is commonly cherished. For example, if you are living in village, in rural areas, people help each other in watering their fields, in their crops. In the same manner, they are helping each other in attending guests in the weddings, in the marriages, in the birth of the kids, or maybe the Eid ceremonies, or at the funerals. They are cooperating with each other directly. So it will come in the category of that direct cooperation. Second one is indirect cooperation. People doing unlike things for the achievement of similar goal, and this is called indirect cooperation. For example, owner of mill and its worker, businessmen and customers, they are people of different classes, but they are cooperating in some manner to achieve the similar goal, or this goal. This will be termed as a indirect cooperation. Then we have accommodation. It is the suspension of rivalry between the parties for temporary or permanent period. Two parties choose to at least postpone their rivalries, or let it go, and they try to accommodate each other. This will be called accommodation. And the second thing is, then this process, the issue may not be settled permanently, but they will terminate their rivalries and activities for some time, and they will come to an agreement towards some joint effort without open hostilities. So there are two categories according to Park and Burgess. First is the adjustment with new natural conditions. It could be climate, geographical changes, and geophysical conditions. So if there is shortage of water, or increase in heat waves, so men will try to accommodate with that, with coming out with the alternate views of life. Another is adjustment with new social conditions. In this case, individual who migrate to another culture area, he adopt cultural conditions of that society. So for example, if there is a guy who is traveling to Europe from the Asian countries, so he will accommodate himself to that new culture. Hence, the process of accommodation removes the social and cultural differences between two individuals, groups, and societies. Another one is the forms of accommodations. There are different forms. One is truce. So in this process, rivalries are stopped for definite or indefinite periods without settling the issues. And they are trying to postpone their freeze their rivalries without solving the main issues on which they have conflict. So we can give example of the truce of Hudaybiyah, which was between Quraysh and the Muslims in 628 AC. Then another one is compromise. In this process, property, the different parties or more properties, parties compromise certain concessions, and rather than fighting, they accepts each other terms and conditions. For example, Arab states and Israel, and agreements of trade between Pakistan and India. Then we have another one, temporary subordination and superordination. In this case, either of the two parties seeks upper hand in a certain conflict, and this superordination of the dominant party is recognized by the both sides. We can use the example of the Treaty of Versailles, in which Germany was defeated, and as a result they had to accept the terms and conditions of the dominant groups are the victors, and that Woodrow Wilson of the President of America played vital role. And so United Kingdom and America and etc., they were the victors of that war. As a result, the Germans had to accept all the conditions which they had imposed on them. Then another one is arbitrations. In this type of accommodations, the conflict is resolved with the help of the third party who is acting as a mediator. For example, UNO is performing that functions in too many conflicts. Or we can give the example of Indus Water Treaty between Pakistan and India, in which I think the World Bank played the role of mediator. And then another one is the toleration. One of the party attempts to live peacefully with others even at the expense of more or less loss from the opposite side. So one party is either due to lack of the power to challenge his opponent, or maybe due to his high moralities, they choose to live peacefully. We can give the example of Kashmir, in which Muslims are living at the toleration with the India. Or we can give the example of Chechnya and so many other Muslim states. So let's proceed to another one, assimilation. It is a social process in which the rivalries and cultural differences tend to disappear gradually by the process of time. And so Young and Mack is defining assimilation as that it is the fusion or blending of two previously distinct groups into one. For example, we can give the example of the the Muslims who migrated to Pakistan after the partition, and after a decade, they showed a remarkable convergence with the local cultures. It is slow and gradual process, and it's providing permanent solutions to intergroup disputes and differences. And another thing is, it is mostly unconscious. You are not aware that it's happening, but it will slowly and gradually happens. As a result, there will be diffusion of two cultures. Another one, we have just one terms over there, the marginal man. So the person in state of adjustment and moral adjustment is called the marginal man. For example, someone is migrating to a new society where there is a different culture, different norms, different values. So he's bit confused. He's facing difficulty in adapting that new culture, and he's between he's stuck there. He don't know what to do. His old culture, his old values are no more applicable there, and he's failed to learn that new values and new cultures. As a result, he's isolated and secluded. So that man or that person is known as the marginal man in the sociology. Another one is the acculturation. It is the process of transmitting culture traits from one culture to another for a longer time, so as to make both cultures similar to each other. And this is the transmitting of cultural traits from one another rather than getting diffused into each other. So there could be two possibilities. One could be like we have previously discussed. It could be assimilations in which two cultures are slowly and gradually um, assimilate with each other. And the second one is that the borrowing of traits reciprocally by diverse group is there, but the process does not attain the degree of synthesis for both the cultures. On the other hand, they retain their identical culture states. We can give example of Pakistan, in which Sindhis, Baloch, Pathan, and Punjabis have been living in their respective regions since centuries, and they have their own cultures and they have commonalities. So it is a perfect example of the acculturation. Uh, English language, Western dresses in our society example of acculturations. Then we have amalgamation. So it means fusion of two different groups and cultures into one in such a way that they lose their respective identity. It's like extreme culture of diffusion, or you can say fusion of cultures. They are mixed to extents in which they are losing their own identity. So first there is diffusion of traits between the contacting cultures, and secondly comes the stage of acculturations process, and thirdly there is assimilation, and fourthly the amalgamation, which is the mature stage of cultural diffusion and fusion into one another. For example, wearing trousers, pajama, patloon, coat, kurta, etc. in our Pakistani society is example of amalgamation. Similarly, science, technology, use of train, airplane, etc. have been amalgamated in our societies. So these were previously we studied the associative things which we have studied. Now we will talk about the disassociative. It is competition. So competition is the striving of two or more persons for the same good, which is limited so that all cannot share. So people compete with each other in social, economics, and political fields. It could be a material things like wealth, or it could be non-material, or something like honor, which we call izzat in local language. So form of competitions are there. One is absolute and relative competitions. So in this case, competition for only item among all is absolute competition, e.g. For example, for the post of president we have absolute competitions, or for the Mr. Pakistan we have absolute competitions. So in such type of competition we call it absolute competition. Well, the competition for the things like wealth, prestige, etc., it's relative. Everybody can achieve that target, and they are competing relative to each other. Then we have personal and impersonal competitions. In the personal competitions, competitor is striving to defeat his rivals in various fields of life. The competition in which collective instead of personal interest is involved is called the impersonal competitions. So one is on the basis of personal gain or loss, another one is collective gain or losses. So that was competitions. Now let's move to the conflict. As from its name, it's clear that conflict is a process of association in which two or more human beings or groups seek actively to threat each other. This purpose to prevent each other's interest, even to the extent of injuring or destroying the other. So conflict, it's very obvious from its name. It's competing with each other to an extent that we are ready to take that thing at any cost. It could be it could be fightings, litigations, and disputes, wars, rival political parties, etc. So there are two types of conflicts. One is direct conflict, another one is indirect conflicts. So the direct conflict is one in which people seek to attain some objective by restraining, injuring, or destroying one another. So it's example of revolution. If there is a revolution in any state or any country, so it will be a direct conflict, or street fights. These are example of direct conflicts. And the indirect conflict, people do not restrain or injure others in seeking their ends but manage to attain their own goals as the opponent cannot approach to his goal in any way. For example, talking ill of others and backbiting are indirect conflict.